Welcome to the Lessons for Luca podcast. I'm your host, Michael Santi, author of New Man Emerging, transformational coach and trainer, and most importantly, I'm Luca's dad. I've been doing a series on what I call natural laws and how to use natural laws in the realm of transformation and self-mastery. Too often, we want to try and change natural laws or change, like, quote, the way life is to fit our own personal law or our own personal truth. And this series is really designed to recognize and become aware of natural law so you could actually change, orient, and transform your life to natural laws that are immovable, classic, and unchanging. And so when we recognize and become aware of natural law, we could actually orient to something that is solid and foundational, and that actually helps us transform our life and create deeper levels of meaning, deeper levels of success in our life, and also deeper connections with others. The natural law I want to talk about today in this episode is one of the most important when it comes to authenticity. And follow me for a bit because I'll do my best to land this plane, connecting authenticity to a natural law. The natural law is what I call the natural law of calibration, or sometimes I call it the natural law of equilibrium. The natural law of calibration, or the natural law of equilibrium, shows us that the desire of nature is to be in harmony, balance, or homeostasis. So that's the natural law of calibration, or the natural law of equilibrium. It reminds us and identifies the desired state of nature is homeostasis. Easiest way I could put this is if I took a 5-gallon bucket and filled half of it with water. If I were to tilt that bucket, if I were to bring the left side up and the right side down, the water line and the water level would remain in homeostasis. It would find that equilibrium. It would make adjustments and calibrations to keep that water level flat, fluid, at homeostasis. That's the natural law of calibration, or the natural law of equilibrium. That is nature's desired state, is to find access to that homeostasis. Now, how does that relate to authenticity? I want you to think of it this way. As I present this, some of it goes into a bit of Carl Jung's philosophy. I want you to think of a triangle that's upside down, and the point is at the bottom. And so we have an upside down triangle with the point on the bottom. On the top corner, we would call that image. That's a human being's image. It's how they want to be portrayed by the world, or how they want to be seen by the world. On the opposite side, at the top of that triangle, would be what we call self. A sense of self is a sense of a deeper understanding of who I am, what makes me feel alive, what my gifts and skills and talents are. A genuine sense of not only understanding, but a deep knowing of who I am internally. Now, that triangle is upside down. On one corner is a sense of image. On the other corner is a sense of self. You could also say external and internal. Now, the point of that triangle balances on a fulcrum that Carl Jung called our shadow. And our shadow is the part of us that we deem unlovable, where we try to hide our insecurities, and also where we try to hide and house our shame. And so what happens is that upside down triangle is balancing on this fulcrum of our shadow, those parts of us that from our point of origin, from our personal history, the parts of us that have been rejected or disappointed or heartbroken, told we were not enough of this, too much of that, that starts to collect and house our shadow. And our image and our sense of self actually balances on that point of shadow. Now, what the law of calibration, or the natural law of equilibrium, shows us, remember, is that we desire that homeostasis. We desire to be at that balanced, harmonious level. But what our culture values, and also what our shadow tries to hide, are those points of us that we feel and deem unlovable, what we then tend to do is we tend to overfocus and overvalue image. And when we overfocus and undervalue image, it naturally subtracts and diminishes our sense of self. And now what we do is we go out of equilibrium. We over-identify or overvalue our image, and we under-identify, undervalue, or underfocus on a sense of self. And what that does is that keeps us out of alignment of our own authenticity. That as I spend my life chasing an image, chasing external accomplishments, chasing external validations, as I spend my life over-focusing on image, it naturally subtracts and calibrates or uncalibrates my sense of self. And this is where so much of our individual and cultural loneliness is actually trapped, because we're spending so much energy, so much focus, and so much attention on building the image, the external of ourselves, and we're under focusing on the sense of self that actually has us feel alive, feel valuable, have a sense of meaning, have a sense of fulfillment. The parts of us that have this deeper meaning, have this sense of fulfillment. As we under-focus on this sense of self, we're not giving this proper attention to what has us feel alive, a sense of fulfillment, a sense of deep meaning, a sense of deep connection with ourselves and also with others. And so as this is out of calibration, this is where we start to find, people that have had a tremendous amount of success, a tremendous amount of accomplishment, yet something is missing, or there's still a deep void in them, a deep sense of loneliness, a deep sense of or lack of meaning, is because they're out of calibration. Authenticity is actually the alignment of both image and sense of self. That who I am internally is actually reflected in my image. That who I am internally as a sense of character, my principle, my immovable value, the deep understanding of knowing what makes me come alive, why I'm here, the meaning I give to life, the deep, authentic connections that I have with myself and with others. When that is calibrated, that naturally comes through in our image, in our reputation. When those are calibrated, that's when a true sense of authenticity is actually accomplished. When they're out of calibration, that's where we always have this void and this thing that we're chasing that we can't quite put our finger on because we think it's in the image or the external of us. If we go back to the shadow, that part of us that we deem or think is unlovable, as we actually start to do the deep work, as we do healing some of our history, as we heal some of those old historical traumas and imprints and disappointments and heartbreaks, what we start to find, really what we're doing is we're on that journey to recalibrate, that I don't have to overcompensate or overcalibrate my image so that you don't see this part of me that I think is unlovable. That really starts to create a sense of overcompensating or overcorrecting, because I don't want you to see this part of me. I don't want this part of me exposed, this part where I house and hide my shame. When we do that deep work and we actually confront that shadow, and we actually start to build styles and strategies and intentions and commitments to the journey of self-love, the journey of self-worth. As we address that shadow, what happens is our image and our sense of self actually start to calibrate again. In that journey of self-love and self-worth, as we balance that fulcrum of the shadow, our sense of self and our sense of image tend to recalibrate. It's just a natural law. That's where nature wants to be, in that homeostasis. And so when there's a really important point that I want to make here, is that when we, and this is really the lesson, when we overcompensate and overfocus on image, sometimes we actually will be externally successful in that. when we go on this journey of self-love, of self-worth, of deep awareness, of self-mastery, that fulcrum of our shadow recalibrates our sense of image and our sense of self. And so the lesson here is that when we overfocus or overcorrect or overcompensate on our image, many of us will actually become successful. Many of us will actually create extraordinary accomplishment. Many of us will actually accomplish the things that society tells you or tells us to value. But if we are out of alignment and calibration and equilibrium, in order to accomplish that, we must self-abandon. And when we self-abandon, that's where we constantly feel lost, anxious, depressed, and that there's that void in us that never gets filled by external accomplishment or external image. If you think of an example of, let's say there's a young man or a young boy who loves the arts or poetry or anything in relationship to the arts, but let's say he has a father who thinks, no, the true masculine image is to be an athlete and to be strong and fit and have women adore you. Well, that may be in conflict to the young boy's true sense of self. So in order to now meet his father's image or his father's ideal of what image is or what true masculinity is, he has to abandon that sense that he has of what makes him feel alive in order to match that image that he's trying to portray based on the value that his father instilled in him. Now, for some of us, that is genuine, but for this young boy, that was disingenuine. What made him feel alive was a whole different environment. But in order to match his father's standard, is that sense of image, he would have to self-abandon who he genuinely is or what makes him feel alive. And here's the thing, he may accomplish it. He may achieve that image. He may achieve that goal. He may achieve that actual model of what his father wanted for him or told him he should want or value. But in order to do it, he had to self-abandon. And so the goal here and the lesson here is that there's nothing wrong with image and there's nothing wrong with a sense of self. We want them calibrated. That who I am deep in the core of my being, in my true and genuine nature, that's what I portray in image. That's what I portray in my character. That's what I portray to the world. And when those are calibrated, when those are in homeostasis and harmony and equilibrium, that's when we actually feel a sense of true authenticity and power. And so that journey of authenticity is really a matter of recalibrating my sense of self and my sense of image. And the invitation here isn't necessarily to say, like, how do you decrease if you're overextended on your image? The invitation here is, how do you really nurture a deep sense of self? What makes you feel alive? What makes you light up? What are you enthusiastic about? Where do you feel the deepest sense of connection with yourself and with others? Where do you, in your life and internally, really have a true, genuine sense of aliveness? And for some of us, that may be really hard questions to answer because it may have been so long. I may have layered armor after armor after armor in my own sense of self and self-abandoning that I may have forgotten that. And that's the invitation here. The journey of authenticity is actually not the journey of becoming something to the outside world. The journey of authenticity is a sense of returning to who you genuinely are in a true sense of your nature. And the way we do that is we address that shadow, those parts where we try to hide our shame. We do the deep work so that our image and our sense of self recalibrate naturally. That's why this natural law, the natural law of equilibrium or the natural law of calibration, is so vital, because it gives us a sense of true self-worth, of true self-respect, of true self-awareness and self-mastery, because we're constantly using authenticity to be the barometer of whether or not, we're we're in calibration. There's a great or classic quote from Fight Club that says most people spend their lives making money, doing jobs they hate to impress people that they don't like. That's when her image is completely out of calibration. If we want to decrease and recalibrate that image, just increase that sense of self. Nature and the natural law of calibration and equilibrium will balance it out to a homeostasis. That's the lesson for this episode. That's the invitation to constantly increase that sense of self, because that void in us will never be filled by an external achievement, an external person, an external thing. It has to come from that deep sense of who we are, that deeper understanding, that deeper sense of aliveness. That's the lesson for this week. That's the lesson for this episode. As always, thank you so much for being on this journey with me. Until we meet again, be a good man, live a good life, and determine each of those for yourself.